We're now going to move on to the panel system about taking a whole system approach, a holistic approach to hydrogen. We've heard quite a lot about that in the Liverpool region and also, of course, before that in the West Midlands. So can I please welcome to the stage Chris Wright, who is from Centrica, the Hydrogen Senior Development. Is he here? Yep, there he is, right at the back. Also joining us, Jake Tudge, who is the Corporate Affairs Director for National Gas, and Catherine Raw, who is the Managing Director for SSE Thermal. There we are. Good. Have a seat, please.
You took the best seat at the end. Very good. Hello.
Hello. Okay, well, it's a very big question, so I've given a very brief introduction to you all. Tell us a little bit more about yourselves and perhaps some initial thoughts on this idea. Over to you.
Yeah, hi, great to be here. So Chris Wright, I work in Centrica's hydrogen unit. So a bit of background to Centrica is an energy services and solutions company. So we generate energy, we trade it, and we supply energy services and solutions to 10 million homes and businesses across the UK. So our activities sit across the full energy value chain. And that's very much why, from a hydrogen perspective, we are interested in the production, the movement, the storage, and the end use of hydrogen. So why are we involved in hydrogen? So we're keen to help our customers decarbonise and reach net zero, but we also have assets that we need to decarbonise. And together, we think we'll need a lot of hydrogen to achieve that. Just in terms of Centrica's assets, we own 2 gas processing terminals, Barrow and Easington. We have a couple of large power stations, a peaking plant in Lincolnshire and Ireland, and also have own and operate 1,300 gas-fired CHPs at customer sites, so hotels, leisure centres, factories, or NHS trusts, that sort of thing. If you just take that alone, in terms of our own assets, that's around 500,000 tonnes of hydrogen per year, which translates to around 5 gigawatts of production. So that's just us, which is, well, half of what the UK target is to 2030. So it provides a bit of sense of scale. So through our hydrogen projects, our partnerships and investments, our focus really is to try and drive the cost of hydrogen down. We think if we can reduce the price of hydrogen, then it becomes a much more credible fuel for those to decarbonise. And hydrogen can be used in a much wider range of sectors, particularly as hard to electrify, so industry, power, mobility, and heating. In terms of our vision, we really see a hydrogen economy building out where actually these various parts are coordinated by market signals. So very much how we have a natural gas market today. If we can achieve that, then we can sort of move hydrogen from what's essentially a fairly niche product gas into actually a tradable energy commodity. In order to get to that hydrogen market, then infrastructure is going to be vital. And so realistically, we see the build out of transport pipelines and also large amounts of geological storage as critical to achieving that. If we can do that, and we can combine this with the gas and power systems, and actually we can achieve net zero at a far cheaper cost.
Catherine, what can you contribute to this whole solution for hydrogen or with hydrogen?
Well, I don't think I can beat that, really. First of all, I'm Catherine Raw, MD of SSE Thermal. So SSE likes to position itself as the clean energy champion of UK, Ireland and beyond. So we're made up of renewables, grid, so networks, and a thermal business, as well as sort of distributed energy and an EV business, growing EV infrastructure plugs business. But essentially, we're building the largest wind farm in the world. We've got a solar business, a renewable business. When you look at what really drives SSE, it's our offshore wind business and our networks business, so in transmission and distribution. And then we have this thermal business that used to be the powerhouse, excuse the pun, of SSE. But as we've closed down coal, as we look at our gas assets and we think about how do we decarbonise those for a net zero world, as we have targets to reduce our carbon emissions by 72.5% by 2030, my role in thermal is effectively to say what is the future of this business and how do you create an ecosystem that allows for there to be a role for flexible, reactive power when the wind's not blowing and when the sun's not shining. And so for me, it's very existential. And so hydrogen is one solution to that. Carbon capture and storage is another. But from a hydrogen perspective, the challenge is really we have to prove hydrogen to power as a concept. So whether it's costs, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's the load shedding of hydrogen.
But that's essentially by going into the hydrogen production business.
Well, exactly. So that's exactly it. So now as a way of enabling that outcome, we're looking at being a hydrogen producer, and we have our gas storage business, and so repurposing our gas storage business to be a hydrogen storage business. Very similar in that respect to Centrica.
Okay, Jake, what about national gas?
Interesting. No, well, like you said about Chris not being able to follow up on that, I'm not sure how I'm going to follow up on yourself, because that was very interesting, and I think SSE's got a major role here, and I think the cross-value chain play is fascinating. So, Jake Tudge from National Gas. So, you will not be mistaken that you may not have heard of us. We were National Grid Gas. National Grid retains a 40% stake, and 60% has gone to our new owners in Macquarie and BCI. So we own and operate the motorway of pipes that go up and down the country. So we've got 8,000 kilometres of pipeline that go from major gas terminals around the UK, and they take gas to power stations, industry, homes and storage facilities. So we call it the backbone of the country, and we see it as fueling the UK economy, keeping homes warm and fundamentally keeping the lights on. And that's really the approach that we take here when we think about hydrogen, which is you can't talk about hydrogen until you've spoken about the role of gas today. And the role of gas is absolutely enormous, and sometimes we state it as the hidden hero of the energy system because it is the pipes under the ground, not the pylons on top. And when we think about the volume of energy going through our infrastructure, on a day like today, it's perhaps 1.5 times the amount of energy going through the power grid. But on a really cold day, we can take up to 7 times the amount of energy going through the pylons will go through our infrastructure. So it's an order of magnitude in difference in terms of size. And that comes on to my second point, which is around how we operate a whole system, which I didn't actually see is the exact title of this session. So that was coincidental and fortuitous.
Almost like it was planned.
Almost like it was planned. You've pulled together the perfect panel, Adam. So the whole system approach to us means integrating power and gas successfully. We've recently conducted modelling called GETIO, very catchy title, which is Gas and Electricity Transmission Infrastructure Outlook. And it says that by 2050, if you successfully integrate gas networks and power networks, you will save £38 billion. So it's an enormous number. What does that number actually mean? It means you manage an appropriate level of build-out of renewables, so you're not overbuilding on the electricity side, and it means you're utilising the assets that we have in the ground, i.e. the gas pipes. And it means that on the days when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining and the demand is there, but there's not enough demand, you don't waste your renewable sources, you capture it, you generate hydrogen and you store it in facilities such as yours. And then on the days when the wind is not blowing and the sun is not shining, we can take that hydrogen out of stores and put it into homes, businesses and other demand points. And that comes on to point 3, which is about choice. And we think hydrogen is all about choice. So if you are a business and you're producing glass, steel, cement, whatever it may be, I know Angie was here yesterday holding up Tate and Lyle, that's all about choice for business. And for some of them, they cannot electrify, and that's either down to economics or physics. And actually, we're saying with hydrogen, what a fantastic choice to have for business. And likewise, if you are one of Chris's CHP customers, maybe in a hospital or a large business, you may not want to electrify that. unit, you may want choice, and hydrogen brings it to you. And then for all of us, 85% of us in this room, statistically, will have a gas boiler in our home. Some of us may want to have a heat pump, and some of us may not have the suitability of our housing stock to be acceptable for a heat pump. So actually, choice for us means a hydrogen boiler in the home.
Yeah.
So those would be my 3 points: the size of gas, operating a whole system, and choice.
But if one simplified what you're saying, over time you're talking really about substituting hydrogen for natural gas, effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have almost 8,000 kilometres of high-pressure pipe, tens of thousands of kilometres of low-pressure pipe. These are assets that nations should be incredibly proud of because we've invested significant amounts of money into them. But most importantly, it's not just an economic case. It's a case of resilience of that system, greater than 99.9% reliability levels. I've personally never not had gas arrive in my home, but we know that it is a reliable, secure, and dependable system, and it's one that we can repurpose and put hydrogen in.
How easy is it to repurpose?
So at a local level, so these are the gas distribution networks, of which there are 4, they've been delivering a repurposing programme. And that means that by the early 2030s, we'll have a country ready to put hydrogen in the pipes. At a transmission level, we have a facility in Cumbria at a currently operating RAF facility where we're literally putting hydrogen through decommissioned transmission assets. And we're testing it and getting ready because we will deliver Project Union in the 2030s, where 2,000 kilometres of pipe will convert to hydrogen.
Okay, is that job done then, Chris?
Yeah, Chris, your customers best be ready.
Yes, we do have a site that would be a stakeholder in that transmission network. But my view really is that in terms of a UK hydrogen market, that network, Project Union, probably is the single most important project there is. Ultimately, if you get that right, we can hook storage on there. That provides flexibility. Also, you can put production on, and it enables people to access low-carbon hydrogen and go through the fuel switching. We talk to a lot of those customers that have things like CHPs on site, and resilience is important. There's a potential that you don't have to do an overnight shift from 100% methane or natural gas to hydrogen. There's a potential you could do that in phases, and you could have a dual supply. So actually, if you're producing electrolytic hydrogen, volumes become available, it's cheap, then actually you can stick those through. And so facilities can take a journey of decarbonisation. It doesn't have to be switch over fully from one day to the next. But it is very hard to see how the hydrogen market can evolve and provide the value that we've been talking about today without that network infrastructure.
Do you think it's a viable idea?
Well, absolutely. But I look at it from a slightly different perspective. So the part of the business that I run is at scale. So it's large-scale CCGT. So you're talking about 500 to a gigawatt of power contribution to grid. And so for us, when we look at what are the ways that we can contribute that scaled reactive power to the system in order to offset the intermittency of renewables, you have to think about, okay, what is the infrastructure that you're going to need to be able to do that? So our power stations are located near industrial clusters. So for me, I look at hydrogen as a solution to the hard-to-abate industries and the infrastructure that goes into that. So Project Union is critical for linking those clusters together. Because at the moment, what we have is an industrial cluster strategy, and we just heard the speaker before talking about HyNet, where these infrastructures are localized to those clusters. And it's just the way the gas network started, which is you've got low carbon blue hydrogen, you've got storage facilities nearby, so it's either Cheshire on HyNet or in Yorkshire in the Humber. But you have all these other clusters, whether it's the Scottish cluster, whether it's the Thames-Bacton cluster, whether it's the Solent cluster, the South Wales Swick cluster, Avonmouth, I've forgotten, Avonmouth cluster, all of these different clusters that don't necessarily have access to these sort of core government-backed infrastructure sort of projects. And so what you need to come up with are ways to connect it all together, the ways to deal with intermittent production if you've got green hydrogen, the ways to deal with intermittent offtake, which is what our CCGTs potentially could be, or it could be the peaker plants that are only needed and those cold, dark, tea time periods when you see peak demand. So this system approach of understanding where is your production going to sit and what is the nature of that production? Is it steady state, blue, baseload type production, or is it green, more distributed, intermittent production? Where is your storage? Is it offshore? Is it onshore? Is it above surface, below surface? And then where is your offtake and what is the nature of that offtake?
So Project Union is what, a self-start project, as it were, without the government involved?
Well, you're trying to get them, aren't you?
Well, I love that this has become a Project Union panel, so thank you, Centrica and SSE. No, look, so on a serious note, Project Union we responded to the government, so there was a very important consultation that many people in this room would have responded to on the transport and storage models and what that would look like, and we're currently working very closely with the government. But the primary thing for Project Union that we've been very clear about is that it is not dependent on the decision in 2026.
And it's to achieve what exactly?
We will connect power stations, industry, storage sites and homes and those clusters that Catherine talks about to enable one UK hydrogen market, which is what you referred to have a single hydrogen economy develop. And we know that our transmission infrastructure is the single point of infrastructure that can connect all of these sites. But we know that we can do this initially because when you think about the decision on heat, we are slightly of the view that it is not slightly, we are of the view that heat will be a mix of solutions. It will be heat pumps and hydrogen boilers. And if you have your heat pumps, you know that you're going to need hydrogen power stations. And if you have your hydrogen boilers, you're going to need hydrogen. And both of those answers need a transmission grid.
I mean, everybody I've spoken to here would agree with you
Yes,
that it is
I
going
hope
to be a mix of heat pumps and hydrogen boilers. The trouble is that's not what the energy sector has been saying.
Well, like I say, I deliberately don't have a view on heating because we sit in the generation and the transmission.
No, but what we're talking about is the whole
electricity.
system. You must
Yeah.
have
I'm not going to quote for SSE. That's all I'm going to say. I think.
In terms of our residential business, we install electrified solutions, heat pumps, and we also have an existing natural gas business and install and service boilers. For me, I think the question with how much hydrogen gets into sectors like heating, equally sort of power, industry, that sort of thing, really comes down to the economics and the price, which becomes pretty important. If we really focus our efforts on actually how do we get this industry going, how do we build out our electrolyzers, build out the supply chain, let's get things going, let's work out where the price goes, then we can start to understand actually the volume of hydrogen we have, where does that best sit, how do we best decarbonise?
Well, that's what I wanted to move on to, because we heard earlier from the GMB talking about a cliff edge and the fact that nuclear power stations are coming offline. And I mean, it seems to me that within the context of what we're talking about a massive level of hydrogen supply, much greater than either of you or our your contribution is not going to get us anywhere near that level when you take it as a totality of what you're planning. Would that be right?
So in terms of the
volume.
Yeah, I mean.
Well, the government's targeting 10 gigawatts by 2030.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is just a start. And this is the problem, which is pace. It's not about ambition. Everyone agrees that we should scale up. Everyone agrees that 10 gigawatts is just the first of a growth step. The challenge is that if you want to do that and decarbonise the power system by 2035, you can't wait. And so we can't wait for Project Union to happen. We have to start doing this now. And so when I look at what's happening, just even in the last 18 months, you feel like you're at the bottom of an S-curve, which is, it feels like progress is very slow because it's at that very flat gradient of that S-curve. But there'll be critical decisions that are happening over the next 2 to 3 years within industry in terms of taking the risk and making investment decisions, in terms of government actually committing. They just committed to 2 industrial clusters and putting in a CO2 transport and storage, a system that allows for 2 blue hydrogen projects to be built. They've come through with the Net Zero Hydrogen Fund and with some green hydrogen projects, and then we'll see an annual process from there on in. So you're just at the beginning of this. And so at this moment, I'm quite optimistic that the pace will accelerate. The problem, of course, is you're entering into a very politically difficult period. And so whether it's Labour coming out with statements on scaling back their 28 billion of energy investments to be fiscally responsible, or whether it's, the right of the government complaining about hydrogen levies, I don't know the answer, but the key is that we don't come off that S-curve and then we actually start to see that pace accelerate.
Chris?
Yeah, I think I agree with what Catherine said there, and I think the only thing I'd really extend is we've got some good commitments, albeit out to 2030. We're putting in place some good business models, but we kind of need to get over the line in terms of actually let's get that low carbon hydrogen agreement in place. I think we've talked around the energy bill. Clearly there are some concerns around the long-term funding. That needs to be solved. I think really investors in this hydrogen space can see the opportunity, and we will have a vision of how it might look like. We don't know exactly how it will unfold. But right now, I think certainty for project developers to be able to know what the contract is going to be, get going, build those supply chains, build the skills within companies. Once you do that, and you've got the sort of the mechanics in, we hope to have those pipelines in place and storage, and then actually you've kind of got the foundations in place for really the hydrogen really take off.
Put it really, where do you think you're going to be getting your hydrogen from?
So we want to be producing some ourselves. So we're involved in some large blue projects. We also want to do some decentralized green hydrogen. We also made an investment in a technology called Wright, which is a turquoise. So we're looking at various forms of production. Equally, we have an international trading business, so we trade around 300 LNG cargoes a year, and it's hard not to look at the wider international picture as to it's not just the UK doing this. I think we'll probably look back and see things like the IRA as actually a game-changing moment in terms of the global hydrogen sector, because it really is real cash, real projects. And that scale really puts us on that technology curve, which as things become cheaper and we're producing more of the product, it creates opportunities. So we've got our eye on hydrogen derivatives like ammonia. So actually, some of the lowest cost renewables aren't necessarily in the UK. They can be in international markets, and those international markets may not have the demand. So actually, if we can start producing things like blue or green ammonia, that also presents us an opportunity to what's the UK's role in terms of imports, exports, and in the absence of some pipelines of storage, like will we need to sort of potentially import? Longer term, policymakers want to sort of build out renewables. Things like the pipeline and hydrogen could actually potentially make the UK an exporter. So it really depends what the level of ambition is, I think.
I mean, we heard astonishing statistic of Western Australia going for 9% of the hydrogen export market.
Yeah, I mean, we should be pushing for export. That is the government's long-term ambition, and so it should. So there's a bit of a bigger point here, isn't there, that government should be commended for the work to date. I think, it was world-leading with a hydrogen strategy. It was world-leading with net zero fundamentally before that. And the decisions we're now taking, I really like what you said, actually, kind of about S-curve. It does feel a bit like we're going to kick up all of a sudden and everything's going to happen at once. But you have to think about those initial baby steps and what are the I despise the word quick wins, but I'm going to use it because I can't think of anything else. But one of the quick wins we could get is thinking about how to provide that initial confidence to investors, because this is going to be the greatest kind of operation in peacetime, isn't it? You're changing potentially up to half of homes, you're retrofitting major power stations, you're retrofitting industry. We've done it before, but it was in the nationalised era in the 60s. Everything was switched over from town gas to natural gas. We're now going to have to deliver that conversion in a privatised era with major investors. So when you ask the question of what does an investor need, when I was, as pointed out by that horrible blue photo that seems to make its way over my face, I used to work at KPMG, And one of the things we would think about was, how do you deliver confidence in what is short-term cycles to what is a long-term market? And I think it's blending. I think you get blending hydrogen in the grid, and yes, there's a benefit of carbon savings, but the biggest benefit is you provide economic confidence to producers that there will be a guaranteed offtake of last resort. And isn't that exciting if we could have these production plants popping up everywhere and you capture everything, blend it into the grid as a step towards 100%?
Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think blending is a very sensible thing that we can do immediately. There is a market. I mean, to some extent, it can help simplify the challenge as a hydrogen developer, trying to build your facility, but also identify your off-taker and bringing those two things together is quite difficult. And we look back at how solar and wind took off. That wasn't the case. You had a market that you could tap into. So you focus on developing your asset, you plug it into the grid, and that's your job done.
No, I'm very conscious this is a very technical area, probably at the beyond the bounds of my expertise. So please do send in some questions, because we got someone who wants to ask a question in person. Who is that? Over there. There we are. Great.
Hey everybody. Listening to all of this, a question keeps coming into my mind all the time. Is there any desire? I mean, this is hydrogen. This doesn't mean that we've got to look at what benefits, for example, your industry union, or what investments you have done. Is there any desire, or are there any efforts to actually do what is good for hydrogen? You'd still make your money. It's not going to make you lose any money, but is there any desire to actually do what is good for hydrogen, not for your fossil fuel industry? Because that's not the aim of hydrogen. The energy transition, the efforts towards net zero, all of that means that we stop using what you're using. What you are proposing now is actually keeping us in that dilemma. We're not going to reach net zero. By the way, another probably 10, 15 years, you're going to wipe out about 60% of life on Earth by doing that. So is there any desire, or is there any let's say, even efforts anywhere to actually make a change? Not to say we've invested so much. You've invested so much into destroying things, not into fixing things. So those investments, you might as well just bury them if you wanted some change. If you wanted hydrogen, if you wanted clean energy, you need to bury those. You don't need to keep on pushing and pushing and pushing just because you've invested in it. You made a bad investment. So is there any, like I said, any desire or any efforts anywhere to actually make a change? Not carry on going the same way.
So just to respond, one is I hope you're not tarring us all with the same brush.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, my lady. I wasn't talking to you.
I think if I put this in slightly less confrontational terms, I think the question is really whether, given that your industries have all been in hydrocarbons and you're making that transition, it's the extent to which the legacy of what you have been holds back your commitment to what's coming.
Well, that's what I wanted to address. So all of us, I think it's fair to say, are about delivering an output rather than worrying about the input. So hydrocarbons were the input. So the question is, if you remove hydrocarbons, how do you deliver the output? So in my small world, or even in the SSE context, it is power, it's electricity. And so what we talk about is delivering energy in a net zero world. And so that's why we're building the wind farms, that onshore, offshore, that's why we're building batteries, that's why we're building solar. But that's why we're investing in grid, in order to move that electricity around. But it's not enough. That's the point. And if we want to get to a position where you're removing fossil fuels altogether, which I would say is SSE's ambition, so we say net zero by 2035 and by 2030, emissions reductions for the science-based target by 2030, net zero by 2040, completely zero by 2050, you have to do that in such a way that it doesn't disrupt society to the point of breaking. And so we're being pragmatic about that approach and saying, well, where are the gaps? And the gaps are around that reactive power. And so green hydrogen, I am fully for. But until you've built out the gigawatts of renewables that are also going to deal with the 50% increase in the short term and 100% increase in the long term in electricity demand, in order to cope with the pumps, in order to cope with the EV, you're going to have to do something in the meantime. So what we look at these are as bridges. Now the debate you've got is how long does that bridge have to last? Because you cannot switch things off today. The system doesn't exist to allow you to do that. You're shaking your head, but the system doesn't exist to allow you to do that today. Okay. Yeah, so just to be clear, hydrogen storage, hydrogen infrastructure.
Well,
Mm.
I think categorically, I would say everyone on this panel has that desire, doesn't it?
We were talking
Chris,
about that. Yeah.
what would be your answer to this dilemma?
Yeah, I mean, when we look at the energy system, we see major constraints around, we're going to electrify, we need to build huge amounts of renewables, but it creates massive problems as well, and there's things that a molecule can do. One of the greatest values that hydrogen brings is long duration electricity storage. And we think if we can achieve that, this is why we're very much, we're talking about the whole system, but if we can move those electrons, create those clean molecules, store them, then actually we can use them in hard to electrify sectors. And I think that's kind of the reality with, if we go back to where we were, things like the Paris Agreement and let's decarbonize by 80%, it was those last 20% of emissions are extremely difficult. And it's kind of no coincidence that as we move to net zero, those last 20%, we've seen hydrogen really take off because people realize that actually it's not easy to electrify a lot of things we do and continue our industry and heat our homes or have dispatchable power. So I think that's the way we really look at it, is the value of the molecule. I think one of the most imperative things we need to do is actually, instead of planning these systems separately, is with the energy bill, bringing forward the future system operator, is that we need to look at these two systems together, and hydrogen certainly sits between those two systems. And so that's kind of our perspective, but we're highly supportive of renewable energy, but we also realise the constraints it has in the system.
Got a question about regrets you might have in terms of investment decisions, but I think that also links to the next question, which is that government representatives earlier on here at Hydrogen for Life were saying that the private sector is the key driver to building the refuelling infrastructure, which we haven't talked about, but obviously relates to you. I mean, on investment, crude question is just how attractive can you make investing in hydrogen?
Well, I can talk about the practical experience. At the moment, there is no economic incentive to invest in hydrogen. So there is no globally traded hydrogen price. There is nothing to suggest that you would invest in your existing power stations to retrofit them, because you don't get the carbon price that is currently traded does not incentivize you sufficiently to move from an abated to an unabated. So without government input, you have not got an economic incentive to move to hydrogen as a business. Having said that, there is a huge desire and purpose and vision of industry, I would argue, in general. As a former financier, as a fund manager who then went into mining and gold mining, of all the things which you really don't need, and now in this business, what has been so, I suppose, compelling is that despite that reality, there is a huge recognition that this is the right thing to do, and it's it's the only thing you can do to decarbonise your business. And so where we are looking to do is put capital at risk. So we're spending tens of millions of pounds a year in order to set up what are the technical requirements, what's the R&D that's required, what is the balance between electrolyzers, storage and power. We're putting those projects into government at substandard returns, below market returns, in order to be able to do the technical de-risking that will then set us up to get the wave of capital into the business and to get government to be prepared to put money into the business too.
And we can learn from history. So wind is a great example of where the UK has delivered a tremendous success story with CFDs. So the contracts for difference that were awarded to wind took the first contracts like £140 down to now £37.50. So we've had, circa an 80% reduction in the price point of wind, and that's been delivered through certainty from government. So now we're looking for the same from government to say we will provide the private sector with that certainty that there is going to be a market and a stability of return. And that is a world-leading regime that we should look to replicate.
Chris, you were talking about, you need an incentive to invest to generate hydrogen, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Today hydrogen is expensive relative to natural gas, and you need to bridge that, and that's exactly what the contract for difference does. It means you can agree a strike price on what it costs you to make the stuff, agree a price with a customer, and we think that subsidy can shrink over time as electricity is getting cheaper with renewables, but also the technology is early days, and there's the opportunity for a decline there. So yeah, the support mechanisms are absolutely vital, and that's across the full hydrogen value chain. We want to see these things come forward together because...
And they're absent at the moment.
Yeah, they are. We work constructively with SSE and others, particularly in the storage market, around things like the hydrogen storage business model. You're talking about large capital investments, building a storage facility for a market that doesn't exist. And so realistically, investors aren't going to put money into that. We need a sort of a base revenue to cover that investment. But we think if you can put storage in your hydrogen economy, that it provides enormous value in terms of how do we make it and actually how do end users consume it.
But we know that the government believes there is going to be a market. So when you look at the 2050 numbers, they anticipate, and the government is very ambitious here, and quite rightly, up to a third of our total energy could come from hydrogen. So it perhaps answers one of your fourth questions here, which is that what could that gigawatt target be? Catherine said it's a 10 gigawatt target, but that isn't a ceiling. We should be aiming for more. And I think if you look at sort of back of an envelope calculation, kind of scratching the mathematics that I desperately cling on to, I think we estimate that a third could be between 100 and 150 gigawatts of hydrogen. But you have to look at that. I'm getting some nods, which is encouraging. We have to look at that relative to what you would otherwise do with electricity, because electrification is fantastic. Everyone that can have a heat pump, providing it's suitable for the home, they can afford it, have it and should go for it. The same for industry. If you can electrify. But we need to offer choice. And we know that a choice is going to mean a molecule. I love that you describe it as a molecule, by the way. We should do that more, because molecules are fantastic, because they're neutral chemically and you can store them for long periods of time and they don't degrade like an electron.
Is international, I'm just wondering, is anyone getting the hydrogen market right that we're not?
International, I think we're putting in place a structure which long term will help our hydrogen economy grow. It might mean that some of that complexity we have in the business models means that it takes quite some time to kind of navigate that and invest to explain things like the CFD and other things to an investment committee is quite tricky. We've seen other markets take a slightly different approach, and we've seen the tax credits in places like the US. There's different ways you can achieve this. Broadly speaking, we've seen a lot of hydrogen strategies emerge around the globe. So to some extent, it's becoming a bit of a race because people realize if we can get this going, we can start building our own domestic supply chains. And I think that's the risk we face with complacency in the UK, that we've got a great strategy. We've got a lot of the tools in the box to get this working. We need to get going at pace, and there are projects that are willing to go.
Just to support that, I would look at, so US, Europe, in particular, the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, sort of, because they're looking at infrastructure and how do you connect all that infrastructure up. So there's a lot of focus on infrastructure production and infrastructure in Europe, which I think we could look at. And then India and Australia would be the other two regions. India, because it sees this way as a way of becoming the new China in terms of exporting hydrogen, exporting technological capability, but also because it's a big dependence on coal. So they recognise too that they need to move away from that dependent security of supply on coal that they're having to import from others. So I think those are the four regions that I would really emphasise. And when I look at the UK's role in all of this, I'm reminded about the North Sea. So going back to maybe the oil and gas analogy is not one to bring up, but the North Sea isn't the equivalent of the Gulf of Mexico or the Middle East. But it had huge value for the UK economy and for security of supply and our position globally. And I think we can replicate that in the way that we look at hydrogen and get away from the oil and gas analogy. But just because we're not the cheapest place to produce hydrogen, it doesn't mean we can't be a world leader in hydrogen. Jobs, levelling up, industrial heartland, security of supply, whatever way you want to look at it, it is incredibly significant.
100,000 people depend on jobs in oil and gas in this country.
So you've answered what is going to be my final question, Catherine, but I'll put it to the other two, which is, will a whole system approach to hydrogen actually end up fueling the UK's economic future? What do you think, Chris?
I think it's got a pretty key role. I mean, in terms of energy.
No, but that's what you'd like. I'm just asking you in practice, do you think it's going to?
I would love to see it take off, and I think the UK could really replicate what we've seen historically in energy and be leaders in terms of consultancy and also our skills in our supply chain. Plenty we could offer the world in the world of hydrogen.
What do you say?
Only if the government acts quickly. It was your point on pace, Catherine. So the government's doing a great job, but now we need to act even quicker. So we need to get those business models sorted for the certainty for international investors. We need to get the quick wins for demand sorted, so blending and boilers. And we need to get a proper supply chain and skills strategy going. Otherwise, we are going to risk a mass skills challenge. And it was great to see the CCC thinking about this, because lots of people and businesses will either offshore if we don't give them choice, or they will think about alternates, and we want to...
What do you mean? Just explain those.
So if you are producing a product with a gas and you are not given an alternate and your physics demands that you need a molecule, let's start using that, to burn, then you will have to think about offshoring if you can't electrify your business. So we want to give industry choice, and that's why the clusters are so important. And if that business offshores, you will lose jobs. And we've got the perfect opportunity here. We've got the North Sea, we've got fantastic geology onshore and offshore to store gas. We've got world-leading universities and skills, 100,000 people in the North Sea with expert capabilities. Some will go into renewables, some will go into hydrogen. And we have fantastic infrastructure, storage, pipes, production coming. And we have world-leading manufacturers like Worcester Bosch who make boilers and can start making hydrogen boilers. So we've got all the components, and government's doing a fantastic job, but needs to quickly bring it all together and act quickly.
All right, Catherine, I'll give you the final word.
I don't know, the future is now. From my perspective, it's just let's get on with it. We all can get on with it in our own way.
And is it happening?
I think it's happening. It's just not happening fast enough, hence the S-curve. But it's definitely happening. I know we have projects we are developing in order to get to us at a hydrogen economy by 2030. The question is, how scalable is that going to be?
Okay then, well, thank you all very much indeed. I think that was a really fascinating discussion. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.